Did you know that California's Central Valley produces a quarter of all the food America eats on less than 1% of the country's farmland? That a governor of California once had to row through the flooded Central Valley to reach his own inauguration in Sacramento? And that the largest freshwater lake west of the Mississippi River was erased from the map by 1898, then briefly came back in 2023. I know how this sounds. Every one of these is real. The Central Valley is not just farmland and sunshine. It is sinking earth, lost water, and hidden empires. Today, 35 insane facts about California's Central Valley that sound completely fake, but are 100% real. 35. The ancient ocean under the tomato field. You might think the flattest, most agricultural place in America is the most stable patch of ground in the country. It is the opposite. Geologically, the Central Valley is a structural trough filled with marine sediments deposited over 100 million years. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, the Sacramento Valley alone sits on up to 25,000 feet of seafloor sediment. That is nearly 5 miles deep enough to stack 8 Empire State Buildings inside the trench. The ocean that left it there was the Western Interior Seaway, which covered the entire interior of North America during the late Cretaceous. The tomatoes and almonds growing on the surface today are rooted in the fossilized remains of mosasaurs and ancient sharks. And every patch of fertile soil in this valley is a record of a sea that has been gone for 65 million years. 34. The state that invented country music is not the one you think. Most people would tell you country music was born in Tennessee. That is wrong. The most influential mid-century country subgenre, the Bakersfield Sound, was created in Bakersfield, California by the children of Oklahoma refugees. Historically, the Dust Bowl migration of the 1930s brought between 300,000 and 500,000 farmers from Oklahoma, Texas, and Arkansas into Kern County. They were called Okies. Their children invented a raw, guitar-driven style that became the direct opposition to Nashville. Merle Haggard's family arrived in Bakersfield from Oklahoma in 1929. Buck Owens codified the sound through hits like Under Your Spell Again in 1959 and built the Crystal Palace in Bakersfield as its flagship venue. Tennessee did not give us Mama Tried, California did, and the genre America considers most authentically Southern was invented by exiles 2,000 miles west of the South. 33. Every almond on Earth, basically, comes from this valley. I had to check this number 3 times before I believed it. California grows roughly 80% of the world's almonds, and almost all of them come out of the Central Valley. Not most of the world's almonds. Almost all of them. The harvest is concentrated in 5 counties: Stanislaus, Merced, Madera, Fresno, and Kern. Together, they produce around 2.6 billion pounds of almonds every year. To put that in scale, it is roughly enough almonds to fill the Hoover Dam reservoir twice over. Historically, almond planting expanded in the 1970s as growers shifted from cotton and tomatoes to permanent tree crops. It takes approximately 1 gallon of water to grow a single almond, and the almond industry alone consumes up to 17% of all agricultural water in California. Whether the world realizes it or not, the eating habits of 3 continents are tied to the rainfall in 5 California counties. 32. The Yokuts sang about a disappearing lake. Then, in 2023, they were proven right. The Tachi Yokut people lived around Tulare Lake for thousands of years. Historically, the lake was the center of their economy, their cosmology, and their oral tradition. They have a traditional song that describes how the lake pushes the people away and pulls them back. For most of the 20th century, that song would have read as poetic memory. The lake was drained by the 1920s, the basin was paved over with farmland, and Tulare Lake became a footnote in California water history. Then, in March 2023, the lake returned. Roughly 178 square miles of water re-emerged in Kings and Tulare counties, drowning 94,000 acres of farmland. The Tachi Yokut called it a healing process. And after a century in which their oral history was treated as folklore, the geography itself proved them right. 31. The fog so specific, it has its own name, and it has killed. California is synonymous with sunshine. That is the cliche. The reality is that Highway 99, the 425-mile highway running the entire length of the Central Valley, regularly disappears under a fog named after a local reed plant. It is called Tule fog. Geologically, It forms only here because cold, moist air gets trapped between the Sierra Nevada and the Coast Ranges with nowhere to escape. On November 3, 2007, 108 passenger vehicles and 18 big rigs collided in a single tule fog pileup on Highway 99 near Fresno. That is 126 vehicles in one crash. As recently as January 2026, a 59-vehicle pileup in Tulare County injured 10 more people. The state that built its tourism brand on perpetual sunshine has a stretch of road where the sun simply does not exist for months at a time. 30. The man who dug a city under Fresno, by hand, for 40 years. Here's where it gets stranger. In 1906, a Sicilian immigrant named Baldassare Forestier arrived in Fresno hoping to grow citrus. The Fresno hardpan defeated him, so he started digging. Historically, Forestier was inspired by the catacombs he had explored as a boy near his hometown of Filari in Sicily. With a pick, a shovel, and a wheelbarrow, working alone, he dug downward into the unforgiving sedimentary rock. He kept digging for 40 years. By his death in 1946, he had excavated 65 rooms across 10 acres, as deep as 25 feet underground. He carved an underground bedroom, a kitchen, a fish pond, a parlor with a fireplace. He cut skylights through the hardpan so fruit trees and grapevines could grow inside the earth. The trees are still alive. One man by himself built a structure that outlasts most cities. 29. The world's smallest mountain range is sitting in a cornfield. Mountain ranges are massive, sprawling, and connected to something larger. There is one in the Central Valley that fits none of those descriptions. The Sutter Buttes, just outside Yuba City, are technically classified as the world's smallest mountain range. Geologically, they are a circular cluster of eroded volcanic domes about 10 miles across, covering 75 square miles, rising 2,000 feet straight up out of dead flat farmland. The high point, South Butte, stands at 2,122 feet. There is no foothill connecting them to any other range. They are surrounded on every side by rice fields and orchards. Historically, the Maidu people called them Histum Yani, and the Nisenan called them Estum Yanim. Both peoples considered them sacred. NASA has photographed them from orbit. They are 1.6 million years old. A volcanic event smaller than most counties, older than the human species, dropped in the middle of a working farm. 28. There is a war in Laos in the 1960s. There are 35,000 Hmong people in Fresno today. These two facts are connected. You might think of Central Valley immigration as a Latin American story. That is part of the truth. Historically, between 1961 and 1975, the Central Intelligence Agency recruited the Hmong people of Laos to fight a covert war against communist forces in Southeast Asia. When the United States withdrew, the Hmong who had fought for the CIA were left behind. Many fled to Thai refugee camps. Beginning in the early 1980s, an estimated 35,000 of them resettled in Fresno. By 1990, Fresno had the largest Hmong community in the United States. The valley that grows America's food also became the landing pad for the soldiers of a war the American public was never officially told about. The geography of agriculture and the geography of foreign policy ended up in the same place. 27. The 10-foot dancing raisin was a college class project. I know, this sounds invented. Historically, Selma, California has been the official raisin capital of the world since 1963, the center of an industry that at its peak produced over 400,000 tons of raisins per year. At the Spike and Rail Steakhouse on Highway 43, there used to stand a 10-foot-tall fiberglass statue of a California dancing raisin. It was built by marketing students at California State University, Fresno, because their final year class required them to break a Guinness World Record in order to graduate. The category for world's largest dancing raisin did not exist before they applied. Guinness invented the category specifically so the students could break it. The students were officially certified. The statue stood for years until the restaurant changed hands in 2015 and quietly took it down. A monument to one of the strangest graduation requirements in American higher education is now in someone's storage shed. If you have a favorite so far, the comments on these videos tend to be more interesting than the videos themselves, at least to me, and someone is going to know more about the Central Valley than I do. If you're watching to the end, the subscribe button is right there too. Back to it. 26. The photograph that proves California's floor is falling away. This is the fact that got me. In 1977, a US Geological Survey researcher named Dr. Joseph Poland stood next to a telephone pole southwest of Mendota in the San Joaquin Valley. The pole had 3 markers on it. One showed where the ground had been in 1925. Another showed where it had been in 1955. The third was at his feet, showing where the ground was in 1977. The ground had sunk 29 feet in 52 years. To put that in scale, the surface of the valley dropped by about the height of a 3-story building in the lifetime of one researcher. Geologically, that is the largest human-caused alteration of the land surface in the history of the United States. And it is still happening. A 2024 study found parts of the San Joaquin Valley are sinking at nearly 1 foot per year. The breadbasket of America is, by measurable distance, disappearing into the ground beneath it. 25. The largest Sikh gathering outside India happens in a California farm town most people have never heard of. Every November in Yuba City, somewhere between 85,000 and 100,000 people gather for the Nagar Kirtan Parade. It is the largest Sikh festival outside the Indian subcontinent. Yuba City has a population of around 68,000. The festival is bigger than the city. Historically, Punjabi Sikh immigrants began arriving in the Sacramento Valley around 1899, drawn by farming work that resembled what they had left behind in Punjab. The annual parade was founded in 1980 by Didar Singh Bains after he attended a Sikh parade in Canada. Over the 3-day festival, the Gurdwara Sahib Temple serves an estimated 400,000 free meals to anyone who walks in, regardless of religion. One of the world's great religious gatherings happens annually in a town most Californians have never visited. 24. The species that came back from a single breeding pair. Before Europeans arrived in California, an estimated 500,000 tule elk roamed the Central Valley floor. They are a subspecies found nowhere else on Earth, named after the tule reed plant that once lined the shores of Tulare Lake. By 1874, they were thought to be extinct. That year, ranch workers on Henry Miller's enormous landholding near Buttonwillow in Kern County stumbled across a surviving herd. 12 animals, 1 breeding pair. Historically, Miller was born Heinrich Alfred Kreiser in Germany and had taken a friend's name in 1849 to board a California-bound ship. By the 1870s, he controlled over 1.3 million acres. To put that in scale, his ranch was roughly the size of the state of Delaware. He ordered the elk protected. By 1905, the herd had grown to 140. Today, the California tule elk population is approximately 5,700 animals across 22 herds. The entire genetic line of a California endemic species traces back to 1 breeding pair found on 1 ranch in 1874. 23. The city that is sinking faster than the canals around it. The town of Corcoran in Kings County is sinking. Not slowly, not eventually, right now. Decades of groundwater pumping have caused parts of Corcoran to subside by more than 13 feet since the 1960s, at rates approaching 1 foot per year in the worst stretches. Geologically, the cause is something called the Corcoran clay, an impermeable layer beneath the city that compresses irreversibly when water is sucked out of it. Historically, Corcoran was incorporated in 1914 around a railway stop named for the Southern Pacific surveyor who laid the route. A century later, the entire town is collapsing into the ground beneath it. The town is now lower than the canals that flow past it. California taxpayers have spent over $325 million trying to rebuild parts of the Friant-Kern Canal where it has collapsed. The state had to build a special levee to protect Corcoran State Prison from being flooded by the irrigation system that surrounds it. A town built to serve California agriculture is being eaten by the same agriculture that gave it a reason to exist. 22. The methane cloud larger than Rhode Island is floating over America's food supply. California likes to think of itself as the environmental conscience of the United States. It is also home to the second largest methane hotspot in the country. A 2014 NASA study using European Space Agency satellite data identified an anomalously high methane concentration covering roughly 1,500 square miles over Fresno and Kern counties. That is larger than the state of Rhode Island. The plume has been visible from orbit since at least 2002. Historically, the Central Valley's 2 largest greenhouse-emitting industries, Kern County oil, and Tulare County dairy, both expanded dramatically through the mid-20th century, decades before satellites could measure what they released. The sources are a convergence of three things, all in the Central Valley: the Midway Sunset oil field, the industrial-scale dairy operations of Tulare and Kings counties, and decomposing agricultural waste. The state that banned gas-powered cars has a methane cloud the size of a small American state floating over the place that grows its food. Some pollution does not stop at state borders, and some of it does not even need to leave to remain invisible to the people living under it. 21. The underground city below Old Sacramento. After the catastrophic floods of 1861 and 1862, Sacramento did something almost no American city has ever done. It lifted itself up. Historically, Sacramento was the gateway to the gold rush mines and could not afford to relocate. Instead, engineers used manual screw jacks placed every 8 feet around each building and cranked the entire downtown upward, one structure at a time, sometimes while the businesses inside continued operating. The process took roughly a decade. The original 1850s and 1860s street level was left in place underneath. As the new streets were filled in around the raised buildings, an entire 19th century city was buried alive 10 to 15 feet down. It is still there. The Sacramento History Museum runs guided tours through the original gold rush streets, hollow sidewalks, and parlor house spaces of the buried city. The state capital of California is built on top of a 19th century ghost city that nobody bothered to demolish. 20. The Bakersfield Cultural District that has been operating continuously since 1893. Most people associate Bakersfield with country music and oil. Bakersfield also contains one of the largest Basque diaspora communities in the United States. Historically, the Basques came to Kern County in the 1890s as sheep herders, recruited because the grasslands of the southern San Joaquin Valley resembled the Pyrenees foothills they had left. The first Basque boarding house, the Iberia Hotel, opened in 1893. It was renamed the Noriega Hotel and continued serving Basque immigrants and sheep herders for over a century. The Pyrenees Cafe opened in 1935. Wool Growers Restaurant opened in 1954, founded by a 25-year-old Basque woman named Meyi Maitia, who at the time spoke no English. All three are still operating. A diaspora community that almost nobody outside Kern County knows exists has been continuously serving the same dishes for 130 years. 19. The largest earthquake between San Francisco 1906 and the modern era hit Bakersfield, and nobody remembers it. American memory holds two California earthquakes, San Francisco 1906 and Northridge 1994. Between them, the largest earthquake to strike anywhere in the United States hit the Central Valley on July 21, 1952, at 4:52 in the morning. It measured magnitude 7.3. Geologically, the epicenter was on the White Wolf Fault, directly beneath the southern San Joaquin Valley floor near the town of Arvin. The shaking devastated Bakersfield. 12 people were killed. Swimming pools sloshed in Los Angeles. High-rises swayed in San Francisco. Damage was reported as far away as San Diego, the largest seismic event in the United States in nearly half a century, and almost no one outside Kern County has ever heard of it. The earthquakes Americans remember are the ones that hit cities the country was paying attention to. 18. The county with more dairy cows than people and more total farm value than any county in America. In Wisconsin, dairy is part of the state identity. In California, almost no one realizes which county is the actual dairy capital of the United States. It is Tulare County. Tulare County contains somewhere between 375,000 and 500,000 dairy cows. Its human population is approximately 470,000. There are more cows than people. Historically, dairy displaced cotton as Tulare County's leading commodity in the 1970s, and milk production has roughly tripled since 1990. Milk was Tulare County's top commodity in 2024 at $2.27 billion. If Tulare County were its own state, it would rank 6th in the nation for dairy cow numbers. And at $8.3 billion in total agricultural output, Tulare County is the most productive agricultural county in the entire United States. Cows, milk, and value. Number 1 in everything. American dairy identity is built around Wisconsin, but the actual center of gravity is one hot, flat California farm county. 17. The oldest Chinese temple in inland California sits on a street no tourist has ever heard of. Most Americans think the Central Valley has no deep history. They are wrong by about 140 years. In Hanford, Kings County, on a small lane called China Alley, stands the Quan Tai Temple. It was formally opened on November 4, 1882. Historically, the temple predates the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, the federal law that would later prevent its founders from bringing wives or children from China to join them in the valley. The Chinese laborers who built China Alley came to the San Joaquin Valley to work the railroads and stayed to farm the land. The street is now listed on the National Trust for Historic Preservation's Most Endangered Historic Places list. A small group of docents is the only thing keeping it standing. A piece of Asian American history older than the law that tried to erase it survives only because a handful of volunteers refused to let it disappear. 16. The place that destroyed 95% of its wetlands still supports 60% of the continent's ducks. The Pacific Flyway is one of the 4 major North American bird migration routes. The Central Valley sits in the middle of it. Geologically, this is because the valley is the only large interior wetland between the Sierra Nevada and the Pacific coast, the natural pit stop for any bird flying between Alaska and South America. Historically, over the past century and a half, more than 95% of the Central Valley's natural wetlands, 4 to 5 million acres in total, have been drained and converted to farmland. Historical estimates put the original waterfowl population at 20 to 40 million birds. And yet, despite the destruction, the valley still hosts approximately 60% of all waterfowl migrating along the Pacific Flyway every winter. Nearly 6 million ducks, 1 million geese. The reason is the rice fields. After harvest, the flooded rice paddies of the Sacramento Valley function as substitute wetlands, and the birds adapted. The continent's wildlife rerouted around the destruction of an ecosystem by using the very farmland that replaced it. 15. The reason Punjabi surnames married Mexican ones in the Sacramento Valley. Historically, between 1899 and the early 1900s, the first Punjabi Sikh immigrants arrived in California. They wanted to farm. California did not let them. The Alien Land Law of 1913 prohibited aliens ineligible for citizenship from owning agricultural land, which covered every Asian immigrant. The law was not declared unconstitutional until 1952. To get around it, Punjabi men in Yuba and Sutter counties began marrying Mexican-American women, whose United States citizenship allowed them to legally hold land titles. Their children grew up speaking Punjabi and Spanish, practicing both Sikh and Catholic traditions, eating from both kitchens. UC Davis's Pioneer Punjabi's digital archive has spent nearly 2 decades documenting this community, and it built farms. 2 diasporas with nothing in common except being shut out of American land ownership built one of the strangest cultures in California by combining their citizenship status. 14. The single largest user of electricity in the state of California sits at the south end of the Central Valley. At the southern end of the California Aqueduct in Kern County sits a facility called the A.D. Edmonston Pumping Plant. Its only job is to lift Central Valley water southward out of the valley to Los Angeles. Historically, the plant was completed in 1971 as the final piece of the California State Water Project, the largest publicly funded water infrastructure system in American history. The plant uses 14 centrifugal pumps, each rated at 80,000 horsepower, generating a combined 1.12 million horsepower. Together, they push water 1,926 feet upward, nearly 4 times the height of the Eiffel Tower. It is the single largest consumer of electricity in the entire state. The water that 26 million Southern Californians drink does not flow downhill from the Central Valley. It is physically dragged out by a machine. Southern California's existence as a populated region depends on a single building in Kern County that runs on more electricity than some entire countries. 13. The delta that holds California's water supply is eating itself. Geologically, the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta covers more than 1,000 square miles, where the 2 great rivers of the Central Valley meet. It supplies fresh water to roughly 2/3 of California's 39 million people. It is also collapsing. The delta contains over 1,100 miles of fragile levees, protecting farmland that in many places now sits 10 to 25 feet below sea level. Some islands are sinking at over 2 centimeters per year. Historically, the Chinese laborers who built most of the original levees between 1860 and 1880 reclaimed 88,000 acres of marsh by hand. Once drained, those peat soils began oxidizing and collapsing. Every levee failure lets salt water in from the bay. The water supply for 2/3 of California rests on hand-dug levees that have been quietly disintegrating for over a century and a half. 12. The real weed patch camp is still housing migrant workers in 2026. Most American literary landmarks are dead. They are museums behind velvet ropes. The farm labor camp that inspired the Grapes of Wrath is not. Historically, the Arvin Federal Government Camp, known to history as Weed Patch Camp, opened in 1936 outside Bakersfield as one of 13 federal migratory labor camps built by the Farm Security Administration during the New Deal. John Steinbeck visited it personally. The story behind the story is that a young writer named Sonora Babb worked at the camp first, took the original notes, and shared them with Steinbeck, whose novel became a Pulitzer-winning bestseller while her own book on the same subject was suppressed at the publisher's request. Dorothea Lange photographed it. John Ford filmed there. And the same camp that housed 300 Dust Bowl refugees in tin cabins in 1937 is still operating today in 2026 as subsidized housing for migrant farm workers. 90 years after the Dust Bowl ended, America's agricultural underclass is still being housed in the same tin cabins that inspired the novel about it. We are 10 facts from the end. If anything we have covered so far landed wrong, or if there is something about the Central Valley we have not touched yet, drop it in the comments. The ones I have not heard of yet are usually the best ones. Okay, 10 to go. 11. 2 companies in Bakersfield grew every carrot you have ever eaten. I had not heard of either of these companies before I started researching this video. You have probably never heard of them either. You have almost certainly eaten their carrots. Grimway Farms and Bolthouse Farms are both headquartered in Bakersfield, within a few miles of each other. Together, they control between 60 and 80% of every fresh carrot sold in the United States. Grimway alone processes 10 million pounds of carrots per day from over 40,000 acres of Kern County farmland. In 2022, the two companies combined consumed 9.6 billion gallons of water in Kern County alone. To put that in scale, it is roughly enough water to supply the entire city of San Francisco for a month. A vegetable nobody thinks about is, in agricultural and water terms, a duopoly controlled from a single California county. 10. An SR-71 Blackbird, the fastest aircraft ever built, is sitting in a parking lot off Highway 99. In Atwater, Merced County, on the site of the decommissioned Castle Air Force Base, there is an outdoor museum holding more than 80 historic military aircraft. Historically, Castle was a strategic air command base during the Cold War. Its B-52 nuclear bombers stood on perpetual alert until the base closed in 1995. The Castle Air Museum opened on the same site in 1981. The collection includes a Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird, the fastest air-breathing aircraft ever built. It includes a B-52D Stratofortress, a Royal Air Force Avro Vulcan nuclear bomber, and a VC-9C presidential transport aircraft that flew both Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton. They are all sitting outside, off Highway 99, in a parking lot in Merced County. The fastest aircraft humanity ever produced is parked next to almond orchards. 9. The largest accidental oil spill in human history happened in a Central Valley farm county in 1910, and it was a tourist attraction. You might think the largest oil spill in human history was Deepwater Horizon. It was not. Historically, on March 15, 1910, a driller nicknamed Dry Hole Charlie Woods, assigned the well precisely because he was known for hitting empty holes, was operating Lakeview Gusher No. 1 in western Kern County when the well exploded. The flow peaked at 125,000 barrels per day. A 60-acre lake of crude oil formed on the valley floor. To put that in scale, it was roughly the size of 45 football fields, filled to a depth of several feet in oil. Special excursion trains brought tourists from Bakersfield, 35 miles away, to watch it. The gusher flowed uncapped for 544 days. When it died on September 10, 1911, it had released 9.4 million barrels of crude, nearly double the amount Deepwater Horizon released. America's largest environmental disaster, in barrels, happened a century before America had the language to call it one. 8. The U.S. Geological Survey has modeled a future flood that would cost $1 trillion and turn the valley into a lake again. In 2010, the USGS published a scenario called ArcStorm. In 2022, they updated it. It models a realistic future megastorm driven by 2 atmospheric rivers 4 days apart. Projected damage runs above $1 trillion, 3 times the cost of Hurricane Katrina. The flooding would cover a sheet of water 300 miles long and at least 20 miles wide, directly across the Central Valley floor. To put that in scale, the flooded zone would be larger than the entire state of Massachusetts. 1.5 million people would have to evacuate. The USGS estimates the recurrence probability at once every 25 to 50 years. This is not science fiction. Geologically, sediment records show at least 10 megastorms of this size have hit California going back to 212 AD. The next one is not a question of if, it is a question of when. The most expensive natural disaster in American history has not happened yet, but the data says it has already happened 10 times before. 7. The largest oil field in the lower 48 states is in a Central Valley almond orchard. Most Americans do not associate California with oil. They should. The Midway Sunset oil field in Kern County, just west of Bakersfield, is the largest oil field in the continental United States by total oil in place. The USGS estimates 27 billion barrels. Historically, since its discovery in 1894, it has produced close to 4 billion barrels of crude. Only Alaska's Prudhoe Bay and the East Texas field have produced more. Oil pump jacks nod right next to working almond and pistachio orchards. Geologically, the 2 crops grow in the same Central Valley soil because the soil and the oil came from the same place. Both are products of the same prehistoric Cretaceous ocean. The marine organisms that became petroleum and the seafloor sediments that became fertile farmland were laid down together 100 million years ago. The Central Valley is the place where the deep past of an ancient ocean still pays the bills, twice over, in 2 different industries. 6. The deadliest Western gunfight you were never taught in school happened in a California wheat field. Historically, on May 11, 1880, in a wheat field 6 miles northwest of Hanford, California, 7 men were killed in a gunfight. 2 were United States Deputy Marshals, Alonzo Poole and William H. Clark. 5 were local farmers. The dispute was over 25,000 acres of land granted to the Southern Pacific Railroad by the federal government as part of the post-Civil War railroad subsidies that built the American West. Settlers had built farms on it, believing they could buy the land at $2.50 an acre. The railroad later demanded $20 to $30 an acre. The gunfight that followed is called the Muscle Slough Tragedy. It required over 1,000 U.S. soldiers to complete the subsequent evictions. Frank Norris turned it into his 1901 novel, The Octopus. Outside Kings County, almost no American has ever heard of it. The American mythology of the Western gunfight forgets the one fought between citizens and a railroad over the actual land beneath their feet. 5. The only black-founded town in California history was destroyed by arsenic in the water. Historically, in 1908, a man named Allen Allensworth founded a town in southern Tulare County. He was born a slave in Louisville, Kentucky in 1842. At his retirement from the U.S. Army in 1906, he was the highest-ranking black officer in the entire United States Army. He founded the town as the only one in California history financed and governed entirely by black Americans. Residents ordered kit homes from Sears and Roebuck because Sears was the only major retailer that would sell to black customers. By 1910, the town had 300 residents. Then, a 1913 drought poisoned the wells with arsenic. In 1914, the Santa Fe Railroad bypassed Allensworth for a nearby white settlement. As of 2017, the town's water still contains arsenic at 15 times the legal limit. More than 100 years after it was founded, the destruction of America's only black utopia was not a single event. It was a chain of small, separate, perfectly legal decisions, the consequences of which are still measurable in the drinking water. 4. The only town in America built by Chinese immigrants for Chinese immigrants is still there. Historically, in 1915, the Chinatown of Walnut Grove in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta burned to the ground. The Chinese residents who had been displaced approached a landowner named George Locke and asked to lease 10 acres of his land. They could not buy it. The Alien Land Act of 1913 made that illegal. So they leased the land and built their own town on it. The town is called Locke. It is the only town in the United States ever constructed by Chinese immigrants, specifically for Chinese immigrants. At its peak, Locke had a population of around 1,500 and a main street of gambling halls, restaurants, a Chinese language school, a herbal medicine shop, and a Bing Lee Theater. Locke is a National Historic Landmark. It is the last surviving rural Chinatown in America. An immigrant community that the law refused to let buy land built the only town of its kind in the country, on land they were never permitted to own. 3. One valley, 1% of America's farmland, a quarter of America's food. We are entering the final 3, and we are going to end where everything in this video begins, with the soil. The Central Valley occupies less than 1% of all farmland in the United States. From that single percent, it produces approximately 1/4 of all food consumed in the nation. The valley produces 14.6 billion pounds of tomatoes every year, which is 95% of all US processing tomatoes. 1.4 billion pounds of pistachios, which is 98% of the US supply, 95% of the country's fresh peaches, 99% of its fresh table grapes, 90% of its garlic, 71% of its onions. The 3 most agriculturally productive counties in the entire United States are not in the Midwest. They are Fresno County at $9 billion, Tulare County at $8.3 billion, and Kern County at $7.9 billion. Every one of them is in the Central Valley. The most productive piece of land in America is not a state, not a region, but a single valley most Americans cannot find on a map. 2. The governor of California rode to his inauguration. Historically, in the winter of 1861 into 1862, a series of atmospheric rivers slammed California for 43 days without stopping. Sacramento received 37 inches of rain over 2 months. San Francisco received 34. The entire Central Valley flooded. A sheet of water 300 miles long and up to 60 miles wide formed across the floor of the state. To put that in scale, the flooded zone was larger than the entire country of Belgium. Sacramento sat under more than 10 feet of standing water for weeks. The legislature had to relocate to San Francisco for 6 months. At least 4,000 people died, roughly 1% of California's entire population at the time. 200,000 cattle drowned, destroying a quarter of the state's taxable wealth. And on January 10, 1862, a newly elected governor named Leland Stanford was rode to his own inauguration through the flooded streets of the state capital in a rowboat, through the water, to take his oath of office. It happened. It was the largest flood in California's recorded history, and by every USGS sediment study, it is going to happen again. 1. The largest freshwater lake west of the Mississippi River was erased from the map. Then, in 2023, it came back. We end where it all began, with water. The southern Central Valley was once home to a lake called Tulare Lake, the largest freshwater lake west of the Mississippi River. At its fullest extent, it covered 790 square miles. To put that in scale, the lake was larger than Lake Tahoe and Mono Lake combined. It was fed by 4 major rivers descending out of the Sierra Nevada: the Kings, the Kaweah, the Tule, and the Kern. In the wettest years, the lake would overflow its own basin so violently that it would reverse the flow of the Kings River and push water all the way to San Francisco Bay through the San Joaquin. Historically, the Tachi Yokut people lived around it for thousands of years. They called it Pa'ashi, big water. By 1898, settlers had diverted those 4 rivers for irrigation, and the lake dried for the first time. By the 1920s, it was completely gone. The lake bed, 800,000 acres of it, was paved over with cotton, tomatoes, and almond orchards. The Tachi Yokut said the lake was sleeping. They said it would come back. Then, in March 2023, water began appearing where there had been farmland the day before. Within weeks, 178 square miles of Tulare Lake had returned, drowning 94,000 acres of farmland in Kings and Tulare counties. The Tachi Yokut called it a healing process. Pa'ashi had come home. The lake the map said was gone is not gone. It is sleeping. And in 100 million years of geology, sleeping is not the same as ended. After these 35 insane facts about California's Central Valley, drop the one that surprised you most in the comments. Subscribe and like if you want to keep exploring the geography of America with us. See you in the next one.